Today on the Coach of Wild podcast, we have a very special guest. He is our first return solo coach that we've had coming back to our podcast. I would like to tell you guys up front that we did use a different platform that I traditionally use, that I have been using all year, so the audio might sound a little bit different. I'm still trying to figure out the most efficient and most beneficial way to have an episode with coaches, as well as for you guys who are listening to this to have the best audio and best video opportunities to listen to the Coach's Why. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up. But I would like to thank this coach for coming back. He's currently leading the University of Providence women's wrestling team to a national title. At least that's his hopes this year. They are ranked in the top 5 this year, and with multiple ranked wrestlers within his organization, within his program. So I'd like to welcome Coach Matt Atwood to the Coach of Wild podcast.
With the world of coaching evolving and the carousel always changing, we're going to sit down with some coaches and we're going to figure out what they coach, how they coach, and most importantly, why they got into this profession. My name is Kason Wilkinson, and I am your host of the Coach's Why podcast.
That was my Coach's Why.
Welcome back to another Coach's Why podcast. We have a very special guest. Some of you guys, I don't think he was on camera last time. I think we just heard his voice. But we have our first true returnee from last season, Coach Matt Atwood from University of Providence. He's a fellow roaster. He's a social media comedian, but he made the appearance today. How you doing, sir?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me back.
Of course, man. I know it's been a little while since we last talked, but how's everything been since last time we spoke?
Been really good. Really young team last year. We had a lot of deer in the headlights moments at the national tournament. We were second by half a point in the semifinals, and then we kind of let things snowball on us. But we returned everybody. We got a new class and really good athletes, a good transfer class. Currently setting 4th in the country. We have 2 multiple-time All-Americans. We haven't even entered in the rankings yet, so we might overtake 2 or 3, maybe 1. We'll see where we can get to. But yeah, it's been really a good year so far.
Yeah, no, it's whenever I saw all these rankings, I messaged you and I was like, dude, what the hell? How the hell did this happen? Right? Like, it's cool to see all of the progress from last year from this year, and it seems like you guys, you and your coaching staff have really put in the work to get it there. And just so you know, and everybody else listening, since you are my first returnee, some of these questions are going to be, we're really going to figure out the flow of how this season 2 is going to go with returnees. So, you guys stick along for the process, and hopefully it comes out to be a good episode. So to kind of start with, I like to dive into the recruiting side of things. So as you mentioned, you had a lot of transfers. You had, really young class last year to this year. You had everybody return. So I guess let's just start on like a general basis of how you get your athletes, right? So where are you looking for them? How are you finding them? Are you looking at like NCSA? Are you looking at just tournaments? How are you finding them? How are you getting them? And how's that process look for you?
Yeah, so it's changed over the years. I guess going back to when I first started, I was an assistant to both the men's and women's program. Very quickly moved over to taking over as a head women's coach. And then the men's coach that kind of was over top of both at the time took a separate job. So I kind of got thrown into the fire pretty quickly. I didn't have the opportunity to really learn from him as much as I wanted to, which he's still a great resource for me, but he just wasn't the head coach right next to me, walking me through how everything worked. So I spent, especially on the women's side, I didn't know anything. As far as the recruiting side, I didn't know any of the girls really. So I spent a lot of time that first year recruiting coaches, calling coaches all over the country, introducing myself, like, hey, this is my vision. And then over the years, those coaches have become friends, and now they reach out to me like, hey, got this girl coming up, tell me about them, all that stuff. So recruiting's got a lot easier. The girls have helped me a lot with that. Just, we have a big team. They reach out to their friends, but also the success they have kind of flows through recruiting. Athletes start to reach out to us more because we're a little bit more mainstream than what we used to be. It used to be a lot more work of, I look back at old spreadsheets when I first got here, because I was the 4th coach in 4 years of this program. So a lot of those coaches I'd reach out to were, hey, love you, can't send you my athletes, other stability, which don't blame them. Of course, they want to make sure that they're kids are going to a safe home. So we built that stability, that flow is coming back. But I look back at spreadsheets when I first started recruiting here. I reached out to 842 girls to get ourselves to maybe 30. So recruiting's a lot of work. I mean, it's the biggest part of this. I love that. A lot of coaches don't love that aspect of it, and I think they struggle. But the coaches that really enjoy recruiting and talking to those athletes and selling their program, those are the coaches you see have success. So I learned that pretty early on. Just my college coach realizing like how good he was at recruiting and how big of a difference it made, like obviously, but a lot of coaches look at like, hey, I'll just get these athletes and I'll develop them, which is great. And it works sometimes, but you got to get good athletes if you want to win, and just right athletes. So like picking your culture, what you want, what your vision is, like athletes that have the same vision as you or are self-motivated. They want to win national titles just as bad as I do. So that helps a lot.
Yeah. And I remember, and maybe I'm wrong, but last year when we spoke, did you say, were you in the same boat? Did you say you liked recruiting, or did you say you weren't a fan of it?
Yeah, I've always loved recruiting. I've kind of just embraced it. Yeah, like I knew I mean, you can be the best coach in the world, but if you can't get good athletes to your program, you're not going to be successful.
For sure.
So I learned that very early on. I know I'm not the best coach in the world. I have to get great athletes that want the same thing. So
what are some ways that you are getting athletes, right? So like, I know you said that you're doing your vision and you're speaking to these girls that have the same mental like focus, or I should say same like, goals in mind. But what are some of the ways that you're getting these athletes to commit to you?
Yeah, well, so beginning process, I mean, obviously they need to know about you. I run into a lot of athletes at Fargo. Fargo is one of my biggest, as far as like our top tier athletes or seeing athletes that like maybe they lost first round, but they won all the way back out the backside or something like that, where I know like they're motivated and they're not going to give up. Like those are the athletes we really look for. So Fargo is a big one for me. Outside of that, mostly it's calling. So figuring out who these athletes are. A lot of it's also social media, is trying to track them down through there, but still the other coaches aspect of them reaching out to me. Hey, we got this athlete that's maybe she's a sophomore at the time, maybe she's a junior, but it's like, hey, keep an eye on her. And then, hey, I got this senior looking for a home. So that's most of it. But then once we get on the phone, like I really open it up to them to ask questions, because I want them to want to be here as bad as I want them to be here. Otherwise, it's just not going to be a good fit. So they ask a lot of questions. I try to fill them in as best I can on what we got going on here. And then a couple of the questions I really like to ask, like, what motivates you? What are you looking for in a team? Stuff like that, just to kind of see if we're a good fit for them, but also if they're a good fit for us. So.
Right. And so I know you're mentioning like, that you'll go out and try to find these girls or reach out to them via social media or whatever that case may be. What do you find difficult about recruiting in today's world? Being that whether it's NAI, whether it's just in general, what do you find difficult when it comes to the recruiting process as a college coach?
Well, the biggest thing is it's growing so fast. There's so many programs out there that need athletes. So like, I mean, anybody that wants to be a collegiate athlete and put some effort in, they can find a home. It might not be exactly where they want to be, but they can go wrestle in college. There's tons of programs that need numbers. They're trying to grow. They're trying to get to where they want to be. I would say like with it growing so fast, especially like now that we're getting to a pretty competitive level, now I'm dealing with the Iowas, the North Centrals, like McKendree, like I always have dealt with most of those schools outside of Iowa being new in the past, but now we're getting to a level where like we're competing for national titles, same as they are, which the cool thing about women's wrestling right now is too, is like I have a Pan Am gold medalist. I have a world silver medalist. I have beach medalists. Like it typically like on the men's side, like NAI aren't touching those athletes. So it's still cool that like I'm still battling with Iowa for some of these athletes. Like we have a University of Iowa transfer on our team right now. There's a couple girls on our team that we were in battles with over recruiting with Iowa. So like, it's cool that can still happen. It just gets tough because I mean, you got to want to be here when you go on a recruiting trip to Iowa and they take you to an Iowa football game, and it's just a different atmosphere than what we got to offer.
Yeah, it definitely is different. I've asked that to a few other coaches this year about, if that, like I guess like the coach, or not the coach, like the college atmosphere, right? Like some kids, or for example, right, if you were a kid going to like on the level of Penn State, right? Like that could be somewhat of a recruiting maybe pitch, if you would. That's like, hey, on preseason Saturdays, this is what you're gonna get, right? They'll take them to a football game and it's like the whiteout, or if they're going to whatever. So like being in for one, Big Sky Country. I still remember that, by the way, Big Sky Country or God's Country, right? I can't remember which one it was.
Big Sky, yeah.
That's what I thought. It's one of those things where you have a lot of things to offer outside of some of the maybe bigger college experiences. So, is that something that maybe whenever you're talking to an athlete that kind of stands out, or is that something that you try to pitch to them about, like, you might not get the full, big football experience that you might get here, but you're going to get XYZ type of thing here?
Yeah, you got to know what your strengths are. And like, I think our strengths here, we have a small campus. We're almost 90% athletes on campus. So our professors are very well aware that these athletes are going to be traveling. They take care of you. They know that you're going to miss class. Like, we're not at a university where they have 200-300 people in their class where the teacher doesn't have time to know and care about them. Like, our professors here know them by first and last name. They know where they're from. They come watch them at their events, and like, they're really supportive in that aspect. So students like that, great, we can help you. Students like the outdoors, they like hunting, they like fishing, they like hiking. We take our whole team on a rafting trip at the beginning of the year. Like, we went snowboarding after nationals last year. Like, we have those things to offer that other schools don't. Yeah. So we just got to know what our strengths are and try to sell those as best we can.
Right. So what do you, I guess I have two more questions about recruiting. I'm going to ask you about like transfers, right? So you mentioned at the beginning, I know we've spoke off air, I guess, about like some of the people that haven't even got to your campus yet, and obviously what you've been doing over the last X amount of time there. So like, how do you handle these transfers, right? So is it a different approach than like trying to go after a senior? Is there more loopholes you have to go through? I mean, like, how are you handling the seniors, and how are you getting them to commit to your school whenever knowing, as you mentioned, right, they might be at McKendree, but they're like, oh, we have Life, we have St. Andrews, we have this, we have that. Like, how are you getting them to commit to you after they've already experienced that?
Yeah, so a few things. Obviously, they were a senior at one time, and I possibly talked to them in that recruiting process. So I make sure I always leave them with a good relationship. And it's also a mutual respect thing across coaches too. Like, I want to make sure that wherever they go, they're happy. If it's not with me, like, all of us women's wrestling coaches for the most part are pretty close. So want to make sure they have a good experience. And if they go somewhere else and it's not the right fit, oftentimes I've had coaches reach out to me that I'm friends with, like, hey, got this athlete, sounds like she had a good experience in the recruiting process with you. We're too far from home. She wants to be back closer to home. Maybe she's from Idaho. Maybe she's from Montana. Like, can you help her out? So I've had actual coaches that are coaching that athlete reach out to me. Same thing on the athlete side. Like, hey, coach, our recruiting process was really good. Like, I think I made a mistake coming to this school. Like, is it possible I come back to you? Stuff like that. There is a transfer portal for the NCAA that we don't have access to, but I mean, rumor spreads pretty quick. Like, hey, this athlete just entered the transfer portal. Those athletes. And another big thing is, like, our team is not I love and hate this award because we've won the sportsmanship awards at conference and nationals last year. One, it's awesome because it's voted on by coaches and the athletes see our team and know, like, see the bond they have. And like, a lot of places don't have that. So one, like, it's cool to earn that award, but two, it's it's bittersweet because that means we're not winning national titles if we're getting that award for the most part. But I have had a lot of athletes reach out to me like, hey, we saw how your team interacted at this tournament or that tournament, and where I'm at, I don't have that, and that's what I'm longing for. So they reach out to us that way. So I don't know. There's a lot of different factors to it, but as far as reaching out to a transfer athlete, I can't do that morally, sometimes logistically. So those athletes have to reach out to me first. And in the case that they do reach out to me, then for the most part, I almost always contact the coach first. Like, hey, your athlete reached out to me, just giving you a heads up. But also, like, we have to send a tracer through our school, like a notice of contact. So. Okay.
Sounds like, for one, that's interesting. I did not know that you couldn't reach out to transfer athlete, so that's cool to know. So obviously you guys have went from where you were to, or from last time we spoke, I should say, and you've developed to getting these nationally top ranked girls in WCA, and now you are in the top 5 in the country for your product that you've developed here. So I guess my final request, now I say final recruiting question, I might think of another thing later, so don't quote me on that. But for now, is what kind of tips do you have, or what kind of tips would you give for recruiting to maybe new college coaches, or just in general, recruiting in general?
Yeah. So the biggest thing I love about coaching is you get out what you put in. If I want to be super lazy and go home at noon every day, like I have that option, I can do that. But if I want to be successful, I have to put a lot of work in. So that's the biggest thing with recruiting. Like, you have to be obsessive with it. Like, I have spreadsheet after spreadsheet, organizing, like, shared spreadsheets with my assistant, making sure we're not talking to the same people. There's a lot of work that goes into it. I recruit every day, year round. So you have to do that if that's what you want to. If you want to be successful, that's what you have to do.
Yeah. I said this is going to be the final question. Actually, yeah, it will be the final question. I'm going to get into kind of a little bit more of your coaching, maybe programming, I guess. So what does your off season look like? And for me, I consider off season like April to July, probably maybe March to July. But pretty much until they come back to school, or until school's back in session. What does that look like for you as a coach or as a team?
Yep. So we'll just say postseason for us. April, our top athletes are still competing. World Team Trials, U.S. Open, women's nationals, those sorts of things. But mostly like May to, because they have graduation end of April. We still have a lot of athletes here. I'd say May to early August. We have a strength coach here that programs a lot of strength stuff. And then we're kind of just checking in with the athletes, making sure they're working out at their local club. Some of the athletes stick around in the summer, and we'll open the room up a few days a week, and they can come in and get their workouts in. But I want them to enjoy the sport, enjoy home, be excited when they get back here, but also making sure they're staying in good shape. And most of our girls do a really good job. They go back home to their clubs, whether it's California, Hawaii, here in Montana, wherever. Like, they have a place to train when they're home. And the self-motivated athletes, it really shows. They come back a different person than they were when they left. Some of them come back a different person when they left, in a bad way. So it's pretty obvious who puts the work in, and that's why we really spend a lot of time in recruiting with the self-motivated athletes. Like, if those athletes want to win a national title, they're probably not going home and drinking and sitting on the couch all summer. Like, they're probably getting work done. So
do you find it difficult to, I don't know if I asked this the first time. I don't think I did. I don't think I was that advanced with my questions yet to ask this question, but do you find it difficult to get a high school girl who's only done folk stuff? Probably. I mean, there are some girls who do the freestyle circuits and things like that, but for the most part, there was a lot of girls out there who have never touched freestyle until they get to college. So do you find it difficult to, I guess, transition them from folk style to freestyle? And then, what are you looking for in your girl, when it comes to like that process to mentally change and physically change?
Yeah. I would say no. I don't think it's a hard transition. Some of them, it takes a little longer than others. But we just talked to them before, like, hey, if you feel like you're behind, like you don't understand freestyle, like you are. That's up to you to come in extra. Come in. We have practice in the morning. The rest of the day is up to you. I'm here all day, every day. Like, bring a partner in, come in, ask questions. We can teach all that. As far as like the physical part of it, it's really just getting them to switch over from folk style is all about control. Freestyle is all about exposure. So once they get that to click, they figure it out pretty quickly. And it might take till our first tournament. Maybe they go make some mistakes, but we watch film every Monday when we get back, and we can rewatch all that stuff and break everything down and show them where their mistakes are happening. But we just had our first tournament this past weekend, and we just told the whole team before, like, the only thing I really care about today is effort. Like, we can fix your mistakes. Like, if you go out and you're scared and you're timid, you don't attack, you don't make mistakes, I can't help you. You go out and you work really hard, you challenge yourself, you make mistakes because you're aggressive and you're working really hard. Great. All that's fine. We'll make adjustments. It's early in the year. But what really frustrates me is when I have a really good athlete that tries not to lose every match instead of goes out to win. So we really push that. And then as far as the technique and stuff, learning freestyle, we figure that out as the year progresses.
Fair. And I have a question about like your film watching. So I tried to implement that as a high school coach. Granted, right, we didn't have the extra hour that they might get when it comes to like the 7th hour. So we had from 3:40 to 6 o'clock really. So I know collegiately it's different, right? You have really all the time in the world to implement practices and stuff like that. So like, how do you go about your film session? Are you breaking down, and I have 2 questions about like individual stuff, but we'll start with the film. Are you sitting down with each individual athlete for a certain amount of time and breaking stuff down? And then if you are, how does that time frame work? Like, is it a Monday we're not really practicing, we're just coming in with, person 1 comes in at 3, this one comes in at 3:30, then at 4, and that's how it's broken down for you? Or how are you doing your film sessions?
Yeah, so typically we compete on a Saturday, we travel on a Sunday. I usually give them Monday off, so we don't have morning practice. So basically we have a shared spreadsheet that all the girls have access to. It's built out according to times, and then we give everybody like a 20 to 30 minute time slot, I think is what we have on there. But I just go through and I mark out, like, if I have any meetings on Monday or whatever, I block off all that time. The rest of the day is open for them to sign up to do film. So we try to knock most of them out on Monday. Like this last weekend, we just had 40 athletes compete, so we had to do 40 meetings. Yeah. So that got spread out into yesterday. So we got almost all done in 2 days, and then there's a few stragglers we got to get nailed out. But they just go fill out according to when they have class. When they don't, they come in, and it's a grind. You're sitting in here staring at your computer for 12 hours watching film. But I think it makes a big difference. It's worth it. But as the year progresses and we develop down to our top 12, top 16, it's a lot easier to knock those meetings out in a day, especially like I try to have my assistant and I both watch film with them together. But like when we have 40, we split up. He'll take half, I'll take half, and try to get them knocked out in a couple of days. But
yeah. That's definitely time consuming. That's for sure. So something that we did in school was like individuals, right? So like I should say, when I was an athlete, we would have to go in at certain times of the day and do individual drills. And I know earlier you said like they can come in if they choose to, or I know you said like there's that option for them. I'm assuming you meant like, well, actually you said you have practice in the morning, so the rest of the day they can. Do you do individuals with certain people? Is that something that you schedule for sure every week, or is that something that because of how your practice plans are in the morning, it can be an option?
So right now it's just open for everybody. As we get closer to second semester and we kind of have a pretty good idea who our at least top 16 are, we have to narrow down to the top 12 by conference. By the time I get them knocked out, we'll start mandating like, hey, you need to do an extra 30 minutes a week or whatever it is. Like we might give them a couple, but whether that's come in and work out on their own or we have something scheduled that we're putting in for them. We do require that later on. Right now, I really just want to see who wants it, like who wants to get the extra work in. Yeah. We have a handful of freshmen that are behind that have made tremendous strides because they're in here 2 hours a day, every day, like whether it's on their own working on their stance or they stay 30, 45 minutes, an hour after practice. They grab my assistant or I. They come in with another partner, and those athletes have made tremendous strides. So it makes a big difference.
Sure. No, it does. I'm sorry. I'm not smiling at like them doing that. I'm just smiling at like when you have time for these row sessions to come, and I'm like, oh, it must be in between practice and indie. So that's fair. Uh, so now, so what is your, and I know that you kind of told me your off season stuff, but what does a typical practice look like for you? Maybe, yeah. So maybe like, what does a practice look like typically? But then how does it change from like a practice in, I don't know, early November to then a practice in maybe like late January to then you're practicing, first week of March or last week of February?
Yeah. So I'll just run you through our timeline. Athletes typically show up that last week in August. We usually give them a couple weeks to get used to how classes, everything works before we start throwing extra workouts on them, stress them out. But mostly the month of September, that's our preseason. So we'll lift 3 days a week. We'll run 2 days a week. We'll have open room 2 days a week on those 2 running days. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they lift from 3 to 4. Tuesday, Thursday from 3 to 4, it's open room. From 4 to 5, we're conditioning. So we'll do that for a month. Once we hit October, that's when we hit our practice phase. So 5 days a week we'll be in the wrestling room. We'll continue to lift 3 days a week year round. That's what our practice schedule will be from October to I guess at least till nationals. And then after nationals, we have those training for like world team trials, those sorts of things. So usually we'll have 10, 12 girls still in their room through April, training a few days a week. But as far as like structure and stuff, early season's pretty heavy in technique. As we build through the year, I would love to individualize our technique as much as possible because we got 45, 50 girls in the room. It's hard for me to really help one person. Like if somebody's really struggling with something, I'd rather spend 30 minutes with them than 30 seconds because I have to get to the next group. So we try to individualize technique as much as possible. And that's for that reason, but also like we might go to a tournament and only a couple people can't score out of front headlock. So I want to spend that time with them getting that fixed. But if we go to a tournament and 30 people can't score out of front headlocks, we break that stuff down as a team. So we do still do technique throughout the year. It's just not quite as much. It's based on what we learned from the tournament. We come back, everybody's struggling with something, let's address it. Only a couple people are struggling. We'll mark it while we're working through film. And then there's a few things that we do through film, like they have to write a handful of things down, but that's something they write down and we'll work on that with them. But as the year goes on, like it's about making sure they're in shape and ready to go, but also protecting them, making sure that they're not getting hurt. I guess earlier in the season is probably a little bit more live, just because somebody twists an ankle up, something like that. Like it's going to happen. It's early. We have time to get them healthy again. But as season comes on, I don't want somebody getting twisted up right before nationals. So
fair. So do you guys do, so this is something that I loved. And I really try to implement it into, my program is like flow wrestling, or I know some people call it chain wrestling, but I called it flow. So like, is that something that maybe like, as you mentioned towards the end of the year, you're not really doing a lot of live, but are you doing a lot of chain or flow wrestling, maybe at like 40%, 60%, something like that, where it's a little bit lower intensity, but they're going for 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time, just continually back and forth, doing that type of drilling?
Yeah, we work through that. So as the year progresses too, like we give them options sometimes. Like if today's like, hey, we're doing two live matches, we might select some groups, then say, hey, you guys are drill, live, or flow, up to you. Or we might tell the whole team like, hey, drill, live, or flow, whatever you're feeling. Or we might just say, hey, it's a flow day. When we do that stuff.
Okay. That I just didn't know, because that's something that I feel like as you get closer to like the peak time, right? You kind of do start dropping down a little bit of your high intensity stuff. When is your last, like, do you condition up until regionals or nationals, or is there like a hard cutoff date of like, we're not really, I mean, conditioning, right? You're still getting a good workout in, not discounting not conditioning, but like you're not running sprints for when's your last day of like an actual portion of practice of conditioning?
Yeah. I would say for the most part, we try to stay consistent and train through the whole year. So like we try to be pretty organized so the girls know what Mondays look like, what Tuesdays look like. So like they come in with the expectation, whether it's not going to be exactly the same every week, but like the structure might be similar. So they know what's going on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite part of practice? I mean, I think I know this part, but I'm gonna let you explain it. What's your favorite part of practice?
Other than roasting them.
Yeah, I was gonna say the roasting part, or like somebody who shows up late and you have to stay late to like watch them suffer a little bit. Outside of those two things, yeah.
Yeah, those are fun. I really like to watch the athletes that struggled with something or they got beat and watch them turn it around. So like they really struggle with something and then I see them working on it. I see them that they and I did an individual session and I see them implementing that stuff and learning from that. But also I see somebody got pinned by somebody they shouldn't have got pinned by and they're motivated and they're on a warpath the next week. So I really love those aspects. One thing I was going to throw in that you were talking about the conditioning part, we changed something up this year too. We only do sprints for cutting corners. So now I don't think like running really helps you that much in wrestling. Cause I mean, you can be a sprinter, a long distance runner and throw somebody in a wrestling room and they're not in shape. So our conditioning, I want to really come from wrestling. But with that, my assistant and I pay attention the whole practice. Somebody cutting corners we tell them cutting corners is being lazy. Cutting corners is not making mistakes. So if somebody makes a mistake, not a big deal. Somebody has a real trashy finish because they're being lazy and we know they're better than that. We flag that. So we're getting towards the end of practice. I walk over to my assistant like, hey, how many you got? And he's like, I got 4. I'm like, all right, great. I got 4 too. We'll run 8 sprints at the end of practice.
Yep.
So our team's very well aware of that. And we make sure like I would rather them cut no corners during practice and have no sprints than be lazy the whole practice and have 20 sprints at the end. Like they're getting more out of practicing correctly than they are those sprints. So we just use sprints as a little bit of motivation now. Like, and then there might be some days where maybe they screwed up over the weekend and I'll say, hey, cutting corners is bear crawls today or something like that. And we might put bear crawls on them, but we bring everybody in before practice starts and kind of go through our daily objectives. Like, hey, this is the objectives today. Cutting corners is this, whatever it is, like whatever they need to know. So
I think, and that's actually something that I middle to end of like my first season of coaching was like, we try to implement hard ups, right? Like I'm sure you know what hard ups are, but some people may not. Hard ups are when after your drill, you keep the pressure on them. You allow your partner to get up, but you're not just letting them get up, right? You're keeping some sort of physical pressure on them to make them work their way up. And that's what I would do, right? Our coaches would keep track of it, tally up, and those groups would have to do it. And then at the beginning, it was the whole team, and then we'd start narrowing it down, right? Especially as you got a little bit less of. But that was definitely something that I did. So I can appreciate what you're mentioning about as what's the right term? Damn, I don't know why I just went blank. What the hell do you call it when you do something wrong?
Like punishment or what do you?
There you go. Yeah, there we go. Jeez, oh man, what the heck? Yeah. Don't roast me for that one later, please.
No. I like to, because our leaders in the room that might be kind of silent leaders, like lead by example. Like now they don't want to run sprints after, so like, hey, get it together, and like they can kind of step up, and I like that too.
Yeah, player-led teams, right? Or player-led will definitely help out in the room with culture. So what's your favorite tradition that you've implemented into the Argos and really the University of Providence that may not have been there before, but maybe your team, your school, your athletes, I should say your coaches, your athletes, whatever, either really enjoy or maybe it's just something that you like?
Tradition. I don't know. I don't know that there's anything that I don't know. I mean, as far as like culture goes, like you said, with like player-led teams, like that's something I've strived for forever. It's like the team that has no leaders, or what is it? Like basically only if the coaches are the only leaders, like you're a poor team. When the players take over and really start to lead, that's when you're a good team. So that's what we've really pushed for the whole time. I would say that's the biggest thing. I guess if you call that a tradition, it's now that when athletes start to step out of line, like our girls grab them like, hey, that's not what we do here. We want to win national titles. Like that's not going to help us. And they do a really good job with that. So I guess if you call that a tradition, that's something.
Yeah.
That's good, so.
I mean, it's something that's implemented, right? That you have strived to build, and it's starting to start. It's really starting to transpire for you. So yeah, I mean, I would call that a tradition, right? It's going to be a tradition at University of Providence that your captains or your leaders or your seniors or whoever's doing it, that's the standards or expectations that they need to know is theirs whenever they step in that role, you know?
Yeah.
So for sure, I would agree with that. So how do you get kids or your athletes to peak at the right time? And I think this is a very important piece of anything, right? You can be undefeated until January and then start turning, mentally turning around or whatever to where you're not peaking when you need to. You could peak at the beginning, but you need to peak in February. So how do you get them to peak on both? And this is a two-parter, kind of on the mental approach, but also physically as well.
Yeah. So I guess big picture, we have our schedule built out and we look through it like this tournament are pretty important tournaments for us. These tournaments I don't necessarily care as much about. They're great. We're going to go get mat time. We're going to do well. But we might train through those tournaments. So I want our girls to kind of have little peaks throughout the whole year. So maybe we're training really hard. First tournament's coming up. We want them to feel good. We want them to wrestle well. So maybe we'll back off a little bit a few days before. But next two tournaments aren't that big a deal. We're going to train through those tournaments. We're going to train hard. But then we got our fourth tournament's pretty big deal. So we want a little peak there. So maybe that week backs off. And I think it's just really making sure that they feel good, they feel confident. And that's kind of about making sure they see the right people too. So when we're looking at our big picture schedule, like, hey, we're going to see the Mid-South teams here. We're going to see the Hart teams here. And that helps us with our ranking and allocation and all that process for getting to nationals. But just making sure that they've seen everybody they need to see by the time they get to the national tournament's a big thing. But also just knowing when to back off and not to run them into the ground. You see a lot of programs throughout here that they have one of the top teams in the country preseason, and then by the end of the season they have 6 injured girls and 3 of their starters aren't at the national tournament because they have 60 matches during the year and they practice 3 times a day and their athletes are just worn out. So I think it's a big thing of making sure, one, that they see the right people they need to see, but we're not overworking them. We're getting them. My target for our starters is 30 matches by the national tournament. So making sure we're getting them there, and just making sure they feel good. And I don't know.
I was going to say there's definitely that. So it sounds like there's that good, happy ratio of what you're trying to do, right? Like in high school, right? Like I left high school with like 60 matches, I think. And we were getting, and most everybody, that year and years after were at least 45 plus, maybe 50 plus matches, right? And, and then you look at like college guys, right? Really, no matter where you look, maybe not anywhere you look, but, you're looking at guys at the Division I level going in with, 14-1 or 12-0 or whatever, right? They're very low matches. And so it sounds like you don't want them to be too physically, which I know that's probably a little light. Like I would like to see probably 30 or so, but, are you going to, like, when you say these bigger tournaments, are you going to these tournaments that have mostly NAI talent? Or are you going to these big, like these mid-season tournaments that you might see, Mesa, or you might see, like you said, Iowa, or some of these, Presbyterian, whatever, you might see some D1 versus D2, D3 talent as well?
Yeah, it's a mixture. So like we used to go to Colorado Mesa's home tournament. We haven't the last couple of years. But we'll go to North Central before Christmas. So it'll almost all be NCAA teams for the most part. We'll have maybe 7 or 8 NAI teams, but huge tournament. I mean, Iowa's there, North Central's there. I don't think McKendree went last year, but there's a lot of those top teams that are there. And we did really well last year. We only lost to North Central. So great turnout there. We get to see, and those are those tournaments where we're going to just get competition, good hard competition. Some of these other tournaments we're looking at, like, hey, we're going to specifically be able to see these teams that are in the Midwest that we're not going to get to see the rest of the year. So as far as like our national allocation process goes, like, we need those wins to get our athletes in the top 17. The top 17 earns that weight class and allocation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that athlete that's ranked number 10 gets to go to the national tournament. But if there's 5 athletes in our conference that are ranked in that top 16, those top 5 get to go. So it's important not only for our athletes, but for our conference to make sure, because we're fortunate here. Like, we have some decent resources. We fundraise a lot. Like, we get to travel and get our teams to those best tournaments. Some of the teams in our conference don't necessarily have that luxury. So, like, it's good for us to go earn those allocations kind of for them. I mean, it sucks that they're not able to do the same for us, but it's important for our conference.
Yeah. And so kind of 2 things off of that. One of them is, I know you were, as you're mentioning, like, as you're traveling and doing things like that to make these allocations, maybe I'm naive to it, right? And maybe I just haven't spoken on it, but I would love it. So is there like a regional to qualify to go to the tournament, or is it more of like, as you mentioned, what you've done throughout the year, and then they pick the best like you said, 17 girls to go?
Yeah. So NCAA is developed into regions. We're developed into conferences. Yep. So for us, we're in the Cascade Conference, and it used to be us, Menlo, Vanguard, like Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon. Menlo and Vanguard just dropped out to transition to NCAA. So that hurt our conference quite a bit, but really it's allocations for the conference. So say at 103 pounds, if there's 3 girls ranked in the top 17 from our conference, you have to place top 3 to earn your spot to the national tournament. So if we have number 1, number 2, and number 3 in the country in our conference, and some other girl places top 3, she took an allocation from somebody that brought it there, and she gets to go.
I see. Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it works this year. And then we have a conference bid allocation too, where each conference, I think it used to be 8. I think this year we got 5. So we sat down as coaches. We put all our athletes on the board that maybe didn't make it, or that we thought deserved to make it, or maybe we had the number 1 girl in the country and she hurt her ankle at whatever match and she didn't place in that spot. That's what those are for. Be like, hey, she got hurt, this and whatever went on. Like, she's a 3-time All-American. She deserves to go. And we can bid those people in. And then we have a leftover pool after that of however many athletes. Let's say we have 5. Those get sent to the national committee. And then me and 4 other coaches are on the national committee. And we rate all of them just like we do during the year. And we pick who should go. So
who should go. And that's something that's done before, obviously, before the actual selection of who's going, before brackets are built and all that stuff. That's something that's done before that, of course, right?
That process is done the week after the national tournament, between conference, or the week after the conference tournament. Between conference and nationals is a 2-week period. So those will be ready about a week before the national tournament.
That's cool. So some conferences have less athletes representing them just because of that. Now, that at the same time, right? Like NAI, you could technically have 2 or 3 girls from one school go, just depending on how they finish at conference.
Yeah.
And stuff
So we can take 12 athletes total. There's 10 weight classes, and we can take 2 per weight if we want. So I can take 2 girls at 6 weights to add up to my 12, or we can take all 10 weight class, or 1 girl from all 10 weight classes plus 2. So I might take an extra 38 pounder and an extra 45 pounder. Right. So there can only be a maximum of 2 per weight class, but 12 total.
But all 12 can score essentially at the tournament. Sweet. Okay. So I don't even know if we answered this. Yeah, we did actually. I think we did. What drill or actually, I remember I was going to have another question for you off of that, but I got lost in the sauce talking about allocations. So maybe I'll think about it and come back to it. So what drill or programming thing should all athletes or all coaches use every day?
Drill.
And it could be like it could be on the mat, it could be off the mat. I mean, anything that is part of your program or drill or both, right? I mean, it's up to you on how you take that. But what do you think coaches should have or athletes have every day?
I mean, as far as every day goes, I mean, one thing as far as drilling, we just told our girls recently, like, because we were watching at our last tournament, girls, beautiful setup, beautiful pull, penetration step, everything's perfect. Get to the legs, we stay on our knees. And that happened over and over. And that's 100% on the practice partner. That's because they shoot that same beautiful, perfect shot and their practice partner falls over for them. Yep. So they built a bad habit. And then when it doesn't transition to life, they just shoot that shot and they expect the person to fall over for them. It doesn't work that way. So I guess one thing to throw in, we just told all our athletes, partner number 2 is 50% at all times. They shoot a bad shot, you stop it. They shoot a good shot, you make them finish it. So I think that's really important. But as far as like drill goes, I mean, for freestyle, I think transitioning from takedown to turn is really important. It's a quick way to score cheap points. It's the most vulnerable an athlete's going to be when they're getting taken down. So the athletes and then also with freestyle, we have athletes that aren't great on their feet, but once they get on top, like they score a lot of points. And then we have athletes that are great on their feet that can't score on top, and they get scored on every time they're on bottom, and they struggle. So spending more time in parterre than you think is probably important too. Especially a lot of coaches probably wrestled or coached folk style their whole life, and they're moving into freestyle. Maybe they don't understand it as well as they want to. So I would encourage everybody to spend some time learning parterre and get proficient in it.
A lot of pressure. I mean, you have to have a lot of, and that's the thing too. Like I've talked to other coaches who are female or women's coaches in collegiate or in the college world, and obviously like shoulder pressure might be something like you have to drill, right? And whenever they're in high school and folk style, but there's a lot of pressure in parterre to where it's a lot of feel, right? And that might be off an assuming thing, but there's a lot of feel, right? You have to really, as soon as you get a little bit of whatever it is, right? Maybe shifting the hips or shifting the shoulders, whatever. That's when you're taking it, and you have to, because in folk style, it's all as we've mentioned, it's all about control versus exposure. So, like, if girls, like, you might obviously in your recruiting process, right? You see girls who love a crossface or love a near side cradle or love I call it a Spencer lead tilt, right? But they're controlling an arm, chopping it, and they're controlling that into a near side tilt or whatever. Are you still allowing girls? Are you still like encouraging girls to utilize some of those things if they're there, or are you kind of focusing on them always make it once they get to their hip, or focus on leg lace or gut wrench or whatever?
Yeah. So I think that's a big thing too. Like, we're wrestling freestyle and everybody looks at it like that's not freestyle, but I mean, exposure is exposure. I don't care how you get there. So I don't try to change any of our athletes really. Like, if they're really good at something, let's develop it. I'm not going to change their style, because you see that from some programs too. Like, this is our style and this is what we're going to do, and you're not going to do these things. And I think those athletes struggle. I think the athletes that are encouraged to come in and be creative and find ways to find exposure, like, they have more success. And I mean, you look at David Taylor, like, he's got tight waist half, wing half, like, he's all over the place with his techniques and stuff. It's not traditional gut lace every time type techniques. So, I mean, exposure is exposure at the end of the day. So
whatever's there, you'll take. I'm sure if that person's weak on a half, you're going to let him do a wrist half and let him run it. Yeah, fair.
I mean, if
some middle school,
if our athletes are good at something and it finds them exposure, let's develop it. Let's keep working. Let's figure something out.
Cool. So how do you help athletes develop mental toughness?
I guess one thing that I think really helped with me in college is, one, our coach did some stuff where, like, maybe we'd have a really hard practice, and after practice we'd have to walk in our stance for 25 minutes. And like, it sucked. And at the time we're like, this is pointless. Like, why are we doing this? But then you get in a 6-7 minute match and you're like, see yourself getting up out of your stance because you're tired. And then you're just like, what am I doing? Like, I was in my stance for 25 minutes after practice. I can stay in my stance now. So I think those things help a lot. But also what I really liked, and like, it's one, because I recognized what my coach was doing in college, but giving us a lot of false ceilings. like to where like we think we finish this drill hard, we're done. And then we finish it hard, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, now we'll partner up. You got this. And like you see a lot of your teammates like fold, like, oh, like throw a fit, like I have this, like they're pissed. But I loved that. Like I just never assumed that we were done until we were walking off the mat. So I like those things too, given I think it frustrates them, but as the year goes on, like they start to recognize it and see the benefit.
And hopefully they'll utilize that in life too, right? Like in professional world too, you're building that mental toughness because life's hard and not everybody gets to wrestle till they're 35, 40 years old, right? And most people don't. So someday they have to hang up the shoes. So I'm sure that's going to benefit them in other ways. So
that's something we talk about too with like our goal setting stuff. Our athletes go in here, we have a set list of questions that they have to fill out and put some thought into. But then they come in and we walk through that stuff. But then they have a follow-up sheet of, is this goal the most important thing in the world to you? And I really push them towards, no, it's not. Like these other things are far more important to you. Wrestling is a way that maybe you can shine light on this or glorify this. But I want them to understand that like wrestling's over in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whether you like it or not. So like they need to have, the wrestling can't identify them. They got to have something more important. Wrestling's a game at the end of the day. So really encourage them just to have fun and be creative. I think that helps a little bit too, like not putting so much pressure on themselves because like I wrestled my whole life. This is all I know. This is what identifies me versus like I'm here to have fun, learn, like get better. It just relieves some pressure off people.
Right. Yeah. Keep it light, right? Wrestling's debatably probably, and I mean, I think it is, people can debate it, but the hardest sport in college or high school, right? Just of what you're gonna have to go through. So I think that it's as light as you can keep it, or keep their mind, you know, on the vision versus like the moment is important. So for sure. So at this point, to be honest with you, I'm kind of thinking that we're gonna do a rapid fire thing to end this thing. Just because I haven't done it before, like I said, so I don't know how this is going to work, but we're going to try it. So I have a list of rapid fire questions. I mean, I think we can make them rapid fire. Don't know, but we're going to try it. So as I said, you're my guinea pig for it. So I do appreciate you doing that. If you guys are still listening to this podcast at this time, if you're on YouTube, HTB, hit that bell. Y'all know what to do. If you guys are on audio listener, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, wherever you are, make sure you guys leave a review. Hit those stars, say what you got to say, but whatever you say it with your chest because we want to hear it. So, Coach, you ready for this this final countdown here?
Yeah, we'll see.
All right. So, how would you describe your coaching philosophy, and how has it changed over time?
I think it's always been encouraging, and I hope it will remain encouraging. I've had negative coaches in the corner, and I know how I've felt, and I've had encouraging coaches, and I try to be that way.
Cool. How do you develop and grow as a coach?
One of the biggest things is the coaching convention every year. Like there's years where I'm like, I'm not going to go, like, but every single year I learn something. I build new relationships. This year I got to go be a mentor. So I learned more this year than I've ever learned. So going to those things, being around other coaches and seeing different points of view.
For sure. Who's the toughest opponent you faced as a coach, and why?
I would say probably North Central. They do a really good job of their athletes having fun, and I like their coaches a lot. Their girls are gritty. They're top level coaches. So that's another thing with recruiting I was going to throw out there too. Don't be afraid to reach out to those top athletes in the country. Like we have athletes on our team that I had no business getting here. North Central has the same. Like there's teams across the country where very high level world team athletes that you wouldn't think would be there, but they're there because a coach put a lot of effort into them. So that's a big thing. Yeah.
How do you handle pressure and expectations as a coach?
Well, one thing I try to tell the athletes is pressure's made up. So I've had myself a lot of situations where like I build scenarios in my head before they even happen, and then they're not even real. So like maybe my athletic director reaches out to me and was like, hey, I need to meet with you today. and I build something up in my head where he's mad at me and I'm defensive, and then we get there and he wants to tell me good job from the tournament that weekend. So like, just keep yourself out of those situations.
By the way, I know I'm cutting off from a rapid fire, but that is a very, very important piece. I have done that as well. I've thought that I was in trouble with somebody, and it was really just like, hey, we have to talk to you about something completely different than what I would have thought too. So big piece of advice there for sure is keep your head in the positive side of things and cross the bridge when you have to cross it for sure. And also to go back to what you mentioned about like the recruiting high level girls, I actually thought that was interesting too, right? Like Iowa's Iowa. They were probably going to be able to start getting girls as soon as they got the program just because of what the boys side has done. But like when I think about college recruiting, especially the NAIA for a long time may even still be considered like Division I level. Like it was D1 girls wrestling is what it was, right? Regardless. Why not us, right? Or why not me is kind of what I kind of figured, not only yourself, but a lot of coaches should have that mindset of why not.
Yeah.
Where do you see your program in 3 years?
Well, hopefully we're winning national titles by then. I'm really hopeful that we can start putting things together now. So like, I mean, even last year, 2 years ago, like I thought we could be that team, but our girls didn't believe it. Like I would talk to them like, hey, we can win a national title. And then we'll go wrestle those teams that are winning national titles and we'll duel them close. And then our team will be like, we are pretty good, aren't we? And they're like, it just took a long time for them to start believing. And this is the first year where like our athletes really are like, we can win a national title. Like, let's go get this thing. And they're motivated. Like, example, we have a 2-time national finalist. She's got beat twice in the last 2 years in the national finals. She told us earlier this year, she's like, I'll give up ever winning a national title individually if our team could win one. So like our team's starting to get to that point where they're really motivated and they want to win it and they want to win it together. So.
Heck yeah. I bet you're proud of your team, man, where you've come from and where you started too. I bet it's a crazy feeling to go to sleep every night knowing you're so close to winning that title. So, hell yeah. What's the best piece of advice a coach has given you?
I mean, something that sits in with me when I was an athlete, I struggled believing I was as good as maybe I was, or I get in those matches where I didn't really think I deserved to be there and I would lose. And then after I lost, I'd be like, I can beat that guy. And then I'd beat him the next time. One of the biggest things that a coach reached out to me was I was talking to another coach. I said something like, now I got to wrestle this guy or whatever. And he kind of went off on me. He's like, you guys stepped on the scale. You weighed the exact same. Like, why not you? Like, so that's something I tell the athletes too. Like, I know where my struggles were, and I look back at them now as a coach and an adult and look at how stupid some of my thoughts were. So I kind of try to talk them through that now. But I think that was one of the biggest things that registered with me.
Yeah, why not me? What's the one piece of advice that you'd give a coach?
You got to work your tail off. Like, coaching can be very, very easy. Like, you can screw around all day or you can grind and be successful. So, I mean, it's whatever you want. That's what I love about wrestling. That's what I love about coaching wrestling is you get out what you put in 100% of the time. Like, my AD, as long as I'm getting my job done, I could come here from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. and go home every day and he would be okay with it. But I'm here at 5 a.m. and I leave at 6 p.m. most days. And then I go make recruiting calls when I get home because I want our team to be successful. So you got to put a lot of work in.
All right. Well, I can tell you that this was a really, really good episode, man. I appreciate you deciding to come back on here, man. I'm glad that this worked out. Is there anything else that you want to throw out there to anybody who's listening about your program, about yourself, about what we've talked about? Is there any final words that you have to quote unquote promote yourself or that you might have missed?
No, I mean, follow our team on social media. Like if you got questions, reach out to us. Like, especially in the women's wrestling world or new coaches get in, like we're all really like, we're competitive. We all want to win national titles, but we're in it for the kids for the most part. I mean, it's especially on the women's side that it's growing so fast. Like all of us coaches are pretty close, like I said, and we want to see it continue to grow and develop in the right direction and make sure the right people are taking over programs so we don't get a bad name and all that stuff. So, I mean, don't hesitate to reach out to me or reach out to other coaches and ask for help, because everyone's usually pretty willing to help.
Hell yeah. Coach, I really appreciate it. As I said, you guys go give Providence a follow, go follow Coach, and do that, right? You guys know in most of our other episodes, we talked about reaching out for help. I'm going to talk to Coach about some questions I have for him right now after this. So, but with that being said, as I mentioned, make sure you guys like, subscribe, all the 9 yards with everything we have going on. Coach, I appreciate you. I don't know if we have a third episode in there. Maybe we do. I don't know, but I think we answered a lot of things. But maybe one day we could talk a little bit about it and get you back on again. But with that being said, guys, thank you guys for listening. Peace.